Good morning. My name is Patience Cook. I serve here on the hospitality team, and I'm also a student at Iowa State, so you won't see me most of the year, but today we'll be reading Genesis 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I am running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It is still there, between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael.
Thank you, Patience. The word of the Lord. Welcome. Hi, the liturgicals pop out when I say that. Good morning. My name is Megan Cook. I am the discipleship pastor. It is great to see all of you here today. Welcome to everybody joining us online. As you came in, you might have missed it, but we've got Bibles in the back. So if you do not have a Bible in your hands, but you would like to have one in your hands so you can read along with us today, raise your hand and our ushers will bring you one. And if you want to keep this Bible, you can. So just go ahead and raise your hands if you want one. They'll bring you one. And we're going to be in Genesis 16 all morning, so you can locate yourself there, all right? Now, we decided to do this series months ago, all right? And we thought it would be fun. For most of the summer, we're going to be kind of slowly walking through the book of Genesis and just looking at all of the times when someone asks a question. It might be God asking a question. It might be a person. But we're just kind of picking out these little moments and looking at them together. And as we did that, we just kind of looked over the entire book. There was no particular rhyme or reason to it, but Phil and I just looked it over and picked which passages we wanted to do. I got first dibs. So I got to pick all the passages that I am preaching on in this series first before he picked his, all right? And I picked this one, and there's actually a specific term that they use for this in seminary when you're in your preaching classes for this exact moment, all right? This is called picking a doozy for yourself, all right? I walked myself right into this one, all right? By choice, I chose this one, okay? This is a tough passage, right? And Genesis does this to us, right? Because it's a narrative, so it reads pretty easy, like a storybook. So you're reading along, and you keep hitting these passages where it's like, what am I supposed to do with this, right? What do I do with this? The Sunday school flannel graphs didn't get this detailed, right? How do I handle this, right? What do I do? All right, this is a tough passage today. This is one of those toughies, but I really believe if we press in instead of dipping out in these moments in Scripture, there is so much that we can understand about the heart of God here All right. And one of these things that makes these stories in Genesis so rich is the intimate way we learn about God, not just by getting correct information about him, which we definitely do. We certainly get that. But it's the way that these stories illustrate the character of God through his relationships with himself and with people. Right? I'm going to show you what I mean here. I have a recent graduate in my house, okay? This kid of mine is 18 years old, right? She's got light brown hair. She's a little bit taller than I am, right? This is our third born child. A little more detail. She's going to go to college in the fall to study elementary education. There's not a day in her life that we didn't think that that would be the case. She absolutely loves children. It's a real passion and joy space for her. So now you know her a little bit better. That's a little bit more information. All right, and here's one last detail. For her entire childhood, this child never wore matching socks. Never. She would come home and like kick off her shoes, and there would be like a Princess Jasmine sock and then like a monkey sock from the zoo. All right? Never, ever matching socks. Okay? There is some information for you. That detail, if you really want to start to get to know that person, I would start there. All right? That might be all you need to know. All right? She is a free spirit. She's a free spirit, and we love that about her. Okay, so you see that you get to know people not just through learning information about them, but by seeing how they interact with the world and the people around them. That's how you really get to know somebody. And that's one of the gifts of Genesis. These stories invite us to learn and be shocked and devastated and to dig in and to ask questions, and they fill us with wonder, like, how could this be? You could read Genesis along with the rest of the Bible for your entire life and just kind of keep holding it up to the light like a prism and seeing each and every time that you dive in, all of the different things that you see when you sit there with it and let it reveal things to you, right? You could read the Bible for a lifetime and still be running into these new little facets you'd never noticed before. And one of the sweetest things that Genesis has for us is to draw us into these complex, very messy, sometimes very terrible situations, and they give us an intimate window into the people actually living through it thousands of years ago. What an intimate, incredible experience. And not just that. It's not just information, but it's a window into the heart of God who connects us. And we can hear what he has to say and what he has to give in the middle of all of it. So don't be afraid to be honest about how difficult this stuff can be to read. You don't have to excuse it away. It is difficult because the situations were sometimes terrible, and Scripture doesn't hide that from us. Genesis doesn't just give you information about God. Through the Genesis narratives, God gives us God. In Genesis, God tells us who he is, and he shows us his heart through his actions. The Bible does not hold up perfect people for us to follow. Genesis illustrates the loving perfection of the one true God we can choose to follow. So let's go back into Hagar's story. So before we begin any of this, I'm just going to make a caveat. This story in Genesis 16 involves two people, Abram and Sarai, whose names will later be changed to how we typically refer to them as Abraham and Sarah. So for simplicity's sake today, I am mostly just going to call them Abraham and Sarah. All right. We are going to get into Hagar's story in a minute, but we got to start with these two. Okay. So in Genesis 15, one chapter before this, the Lord comes to Abraham in a vision, and he says, "Don't be afraid. I'm your shield. I'm your great reward." And Abram says, "Lord, what could you possibly reward me with that's going to last? Because you haven't given me any children. I don't have any descendants to inherit what I do have, so everything I do have right now is going to get passed on to this other guy's family, not mine. So what could you possibly give me that would be worthwhile to me? I'm going to lose it." Right? Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and he said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. And then God cuts a covenant with Abraham. If you go back and you read this chapter this week, I would highly encourage you to. It's really incredible. We just cannot stay here for very long. But God makes this promise, and it's not based on who Abraham is, but on who God is. And ultimately, this family is God's chosen path and people to protect and preserve and rescue the world from the desolation of sin. Humans have rejected God and gotten ejected from the garden, and God chooses to restore the world back to that wholeness through people, these particular people. And years go by and there's still no children. And the weight of this is particularly placed on Abraham's wife, Sarah. In this culture where everything that you own has to pass on to a male heir, having no children is devastating. Women had one ultimate purpose in this society, and it's to marry and produce children. And at this point, Sarah is very treasured by her husband. She's loved by him, but it appears that she is worthless to the world. And a sidebar here about patriarchy at this level. This kind of cultural system, this is a fallen world trying its best to make something work. Right? The world was supposed to be a garden, and it's not. And it's constant decay and toil, and people are fighting and grabbing for power, and evil never really gives us good, pure options, does it? Never. All right, the best we can do is find systems that are not perfect, that we can use to try to attempt to keep order in a world that keeps bending itself toward chaos and pulling itself apart. And this was an ancient system, but it's also terribly current for much of the world right now today, so it is not particularly difficult for us to begin to imagine a culture like this one. And even my own family, we used to mentor refugees. And so there was a time, my kids were young. I have 4 right now who are now mostly adults. But there were 4 of them, and this was back when they were like in duckling stage. So just 1, 2, 3, 4. So we were at a house. We had just met a new family that just arrived in America. And there's this huge family, and we're all sitting in their living room and talking and kind of in broken English, sort of getting to know each other. And it's really, really fun. And then there's some point in the middle of this conversation where it comes around to the fact that we have 4 children, and that is it. All of our children are with us today. And they realize that we were done having children. And the husband in this family, in complete seriousness, turns to Jim and says to him, in front of everyone, "What is the matter with your wife? Why will she not give you more children?" Right? He couldn't imagine why we would not be having more children, right? Children are still the ultimate gift that women can provide in many parts of the world today. Culture gives Sarah one role, and she has not filled it. The world assigns roles, but God establishes purpose and worth. So if you read the Bible, you're going to find over and over that God intervenes in messes, and he reveals who people really are. And God has promised countless descendants to Abraham. Abraham and God, they've had this private, intense encounter. And Sarah has heard about it from her husband, but she has not met with God firsthand yet. She will in a while, but not yet. So what a rock and a hard place moment for her. The promise that God made absolutely applies pressure on Sarah's deepest wound, and it implicates her almost as if even God is mocking her for not measuring up, right? Like mocking her with this promise. So this woman, displaced by the world, does the most obvious thing that any family in this position would have rights to do at the time. They made plans for this, and they implicate one of the enslaved women who serves her. Okay, so Sarah approves for Hagar, an Egyptian slave they own, to marry Abraham and become a second subservient wife. So in a culture where you have to have a male heir, this is how this gets handled legally. So any children that Hagar has with Abraham are legally going to belong to Abraham and his first wife, Sarah. And we don't have to soften the blow of that. That's horrible. Okay? They're trying to use a broken system to fix another broken system that's caused by another broken system, and the effect of that is just sin in full bloom. Okay, sin spreads and it twists. And sometimes the best the world can do is just manage sin with more sin, and that's what's happening here. Genesis is not asking us to accept what is happening here as if it's right. Like, you don't have to excuse it away and say, well, it's just culturally what they did at the time, right? Nobody thought this was good, right? And then the text doesn't hide that from us, right? This is a mess. This is horrible. It's toxic, all right? Genesis isn't asking us to accept this as if it's right. Genesis holds up what is happening for what it is, and the Lord shows up in the middle of it to show us who he is. This message today, this is Hagar's story. And Hagar, like we said, she's an Egyptian slave. So catch that. Long before the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, Abraham owned Egyptian slaves. Hagar is property. She doesn't have any agency. She's forced to marry, forced into everything that goes along with that. This is horrible. It doesn't matter what culture says is okay. This would have been horrible to live through. And Hagar, that's not the name that she would have been given at birth. That's actually a Hebrew word that means like foreigner or sojourner or immigrant. Okay, so they're kind of just calling her like foreigner girl, right? And this is a Hebrew word that you see in other parts of the Old Testament that even can refer to God's people. You know, that you were immigrants, you were foreigners, you were outsiders. Okay, so that's what they're calling her here. We don't know for sure what her actual name was, right? And this plan works. She does become pregnant. She knows the baby does not belong to her. What a terrible thing to dread, to know that you are pregnant and to realize this child is not yours. That would be absolutely horrible to live through, no matter what the circumstance is. Okay? This situation, sin is just tearing and dividing every step of the way. And then they're trying to patch it up, just patching sin with another patch of sin. Sin just twists and devours these people up. And the relationships get progressively more toxic. And Sarah wants Hagar out. She doesn't like how she's acting, all right? She says, Abraham says, your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think is best. And then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. All right. She runs away into the desert. We don't know her plan. She likely did not really have one, right? Maybe ultimately she thought she might try to make it back to Egypt. And here she is. She's pregnant. She's alone in the wilderness. And the Lord sends a messenger to speak right to her. And this is important. Don't miss this part. The angel of the Lord found Hagar in a spring, near a spring in the desert. There's water in this dry wilderness out of the middle of nowhere. This messenger asks two questions and says, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And Hagar says, I'm running away from my mistress. And then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. Your descendants, Hagar, belonging to you. And the angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. Hagar, go back. Your mistress is not right, but I am making things right. Sin spirals and it spreads and it tears and it's left you in this trap and you feel like it's impossible to go back. But if you stay out here in the desert, you will die. I am here to rescue you. You are blessed. Right here, right now, you are blessed. You will bear much fruit. And she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. Hagar gives God a name. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. Hagar, where have you come from? Just a tragedy. And where are you going? With God. You're going with God. Go back with God. All right? Don't go back for them. Go back with me. And it might be easy to see God correcting Hagar here, telling her to go back and obey because she's disobeyed her mistress and run away, and that makes everything in this problem worse. No doubt the Lord is correcting her course here, but the Lord doesn't lead Hagar with correction. He leads her out of the wilderness with compassion. Hagar's Egyptian. Her people have heard of upwards of 2,000 gods. This is the one true God, the one who has heard her. He's the God who sees her. He meets with her. He can't lose her. He blesses her. And blessing is God's goodness, not ours. Psalm 1, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked or stand in the way that sinners take or sit in the company of mockers. You can begin to see a connection to Hagar's story here. That is the good life. Blessed is the one who does not walk in rhythm with the wicked, doesn't hang out to participate with sinners, doesn't plant themselves in a hive of mockers. Hagar, the Lord sees why you ran. You are running from wickedness. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water. Don't miss it. The Lord finds Hagar near a spring in the desert. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. You are the God who sees me. This is not a story about a good enough patriarch and his good enough family that have earned their place in the genealogy of Jesus. Abraham's family is not always good. This is God's story, and God is always good. It is not in his character to give anything but goodness. Blessing is not a measure of our goodness, but of God's. God blesses who he wants to because he wants to. Abraham and his family do not keep perfect trust. God is perfect trust. Blessing is God's to give. Blessing is not a transaction, not ultimately relevant to our performance, but blessing thrives in partnership with God, not by striving against him. We see who God is by how he behaves toward people. God is perfect and constant. After the fall, the promises and blessing of Eden are blocked toward people. The door to the garden is shut. So God goes forward with a large plan to rescue and redeem and restore and renew people to that Eden blessing through Jesus. Jesus is the door. He's the only threshold you can cross to get back to Eden wholeness. And God will bring us his son through Abraham's family. Through Jesus, Eden blessing flows again to those who align themselves with God's world, God's way. God made him who had no sin, that's Jesus, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. One act of sin unleashes exile and condemnation to everyone through Adam, and one obedient life in Christ unleashes righteousness. We do not deserve this. It is a gift. The blessing is the person of Jesus, God with flesh living with us. Jesus restores us to God because only God can do that. So are you in partnership today with the blessings of God, or are you striving against him? Are you trying to keep God and do your own thing? It's exhausting. Are you walking in step with the Spirit or with the wicked, with sinners, and with mockers? Let me tell you a story about the wilderness. So I've been to Zambia a few times with Poetis. These trips are always really incredible. A lot happens. It's really amazing. For those of you who are newer to Table Church, we are partnered with a sister church in Zambia. These are people that we have known. Pastor Phil and I have known these people since 2010. And so for a really long time, this is a really long, great relationship with this church and these people, and we love them so much, and we've gotten to go on lots of trips and take lots of people there, and it's just this incredible experience. And we have a team actually going there later this summer. And these trips are awesome. A lot of stuff is really incredible happens there. Couldn't recommend it enough. You should go. If you feel prompted, just say yes and do it. But on one of these trips, I had an incredible experience with the wilderness. So let me explain. So on every one of these trips, you go do all this stuff, but at the end, it's guaranteed that you're going to spend a day or two just doing like touristy stuff at the end of your trip. Okay? And that almost always will include a safari. Okay, so I've been on several safaris at this point between all my trips. And they're all a little bit different. But the thing is, when you go on a safari in Zambia, everybody is just all at Twitter. They're so excited. They're like, what are we going to see? It's a little different every time. There's one top-tier animal that everybody wants to see on a safari, and that's lions. All right, but they don't really have very many lions in Zambia, and they're kind of hard to get to, and so you're not going to see them on most of these safaris, okay? So the second top-tier animal, which becomes the top-tier animal on these safaris, is elephants. Everyone is like, oh, are we going to see elephants? What time of day should we go? We want to see these elephants. Which is the best track to take? Should we do this safari or this one? Or what's the best chance that we're going to run into elephants in the wild, right? Okay, so on this particular safari, which this was over 10 years ago at this point, unbelievably, I got to tell you what, this safari, I'll remember it the rest of my life, this safari was poppin'. All right, it was everything you want a safari to be. The weather was pristine, okay? All the animals were out and about, okay? You got your zebras, you got your giraffes, right? Lots of monkeys and baboons, which they're terrible, but from far away they're kind of fun to see. Wildebeests, you got hippos poking their heads out of the water, saying hi as you drive by. It was just awesome. It was awesome. It was awesome. And finally, when we get ourselves out into the absolute middle of nowhere, elephants. We run into a bunch of elephants, okay? And I have a picture here of the first one that we ran into, and it was so exciting. It was so exciting. It's like I'm in Africa. There's an elephant, okay? And there's a bunch of them all around, and it's so cool, and we're driving through, and they're just majestic and graceful and beautiful. It's awesome. And we get truly into the middle of absolute nowhere. And we stop because it's just this holy moment, right? There's all these beautiful elephants walking around. And they cut the engine, and we just sit there and take it in. And eventually, these elephants, which are actually quite territorial, right? They start to wonder why we've stopped the car. And so they start getting closer and closer and closer to check us out, right? And eventually the guide is like, okay, it's time to go. All right. And as he turns the engine over, nothing. Won't start. And does it again? Nothing. Right. Does it another time? Just nothing. Okay. And it would not be unheard of for a local to mess around with a tourist, right? He wasn't messing around. The engine was stalled, and he could not get it started. All right, so there we are with these very curious elephants all starting to get closer and closer, and we are trapped in this van, right? Pastor Phil was actually next to me when this happened. I texted him as he was getting ready for this. I thought of this, and I was like, do you remember? And he was like, I absolutely do. So this is a big deal. So eventually, they get so close. I have another picture. I need you to know this is not zoomed in. That's how close they got to the van, all right? I took that picture just right outside my window, not zoomed. That's how close these elephants were. Okay, I didn't want to get that close to an elephant that day, but we did. And obviously, we made it out, right? Okay, here's the thing about the wilderness, right? Sometimes circumstances are going to push us out into the wild, but we can also put ourselves there. And at first, we go because the prospect is so enticing. There's an adventure. It's the unknown, all right? It's exciting. But then, once you get all the way out there on your own, you might find yourself stuck somehow. Right? And suddenly, those majestic elephants look pretty dominating, right? And you feel trapped. All right, let the feeling of being stuck in those seasons of life wake you up to your dependence on God. Right? You cannot get yourself back to God. God can get you back to God. So for you today, ask yourself, do I need a redirect somehow, tiny or big? Do I need a course correction? Are you willing to go with God on God's terms today? Whether it's the first time or the 1,000th time you've needed to recalibrate, you cannot recalibrate yourself on your own strength and power. God has to do it for you. It happens when you partner with Him and go, yes, God, your world, your way, my life is yours, not mine. That's the best way to live. That's the good life. That's the blessed life. All right? Are you willing to walk with God on God's terms today? I'm going to have you stand with me. We're going to pray. And as we do, keep that question on your mind. Right? Oh God, we're just so grateful for every single person in this room. I love them so much. Some of them I know, some of them I don't. But you have drawn us all here because there's something precious and special that happens in this room that can't happen when we do this on our own. I could tell my friends how awesome it was to go to a Taylor Swift concert, but then after 20 minutes of describing it, if I say, yeah, I watched it on TV, they would be like, you're full of it. Because there is nothing comparable to actually being in the room when something happens. And we are in the room, and you are here, and I pray, Jesus, that something would happen. We all got up and we came here because there is something unique about this gathering that we cannot get anywhere else in the world but in the church. We are a family. And I pray that the family of God would bless the family of God today, that you would meet us where we're at, that you would show us that you see us. And as we see you seeing us, that we wouldn't be shamed, but we would be seen, and we would see how safe we are with you. And whatever you want to say, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to accomplish in us would be able to happen unobstructed by sin or the devil or our own choices to keep you out. But God, for those in the room who want to make the choice to get everything out of the way, whether for the first time or the 1,000th time, we agree with you, God, that you are the only way, the only door to walk through to get whole, to get free. So Jesus, we want that. We want to say yes to you. We want nothing but your life for us. The world tries to tell us what is the good life, and we know that you are the good life. There is nothing comparable to you. So we say yes to you, Jesus, whatever you want to do in us. I pray that you would do it right now. And that as we worship right now in this moment, the gift of the unity of this room and this space and all of us gathered together would do something sacramental to us as we meet with you here. You are so good, God. We are so grateful for you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.